Every path we walk holds secrets. Some are in plain sight, some are waiting to be discovered. What if, on an ordinary day, you stumbled upon something extraordinary? An unknown place, shrouded in mystery and power. Not long ago, I found such a place. Deep in the woods behind my house, an ancient well called to me. And when I touched it, everything changed. It was some kind of portal, some kind of looking glass into Aldarion. A world of light and shadow, of choices and consequences. A world that feels closer to our own than you might think. Through that well, I see it all happening now, today, as we speak. These are their stories, their destinies, and I am here to share them with you. So come with me, my friends. Join me in this journey beyond the well. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and wood smoke as Orin Calder rode into Eldawyn village. It was a quiet, unremarkable place, one of many scattered throughout the vast land of Meridian. People lived a simple life here, untouched by the conflicts of lords and kings. The streets were packed dirt, lined with modest homes and thatched roofs. Merchants called half-heartedly from their stalls, and their voices were lost beneath the chatter of townsfolk and the occasional clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Orin rode without hurry, his cloak pulled tight against the cool breeze. He had no banner, no sigil to declare his purpose. To those who looked upon him, he was merely just another traveler, perhaps a tradesman or a swordsman past his prime seeking work in quieter lands. And that was just the way he wanted it. His true purpose was far more delicate. Orin had once served among the hoods, the king's secret eyes and ears throughout the land. Men and women who worked in the shadows, uncovering treachery and eliminating threats before they could bloom into war. He had spent years moving unseen, gathering intelligence, striking where and when necessary. But time had caught up with him, as it does with all of us. He had grown older, slower in some ways, but sharper in others. He had left the hoods behind, or so he told himself. Retirement was a word that meant little to those who had spent their lives in service to the crown. And so, when King Athos had sought someone to move unnoticed across the kingdom, to find those rare few who could touch the Nexus in ways others could not, Orin had been the natural choice. He was no longer an assassin in the dark, but now a seeker for apprentices they would train up and bring in the ways of oath-binding. He reined in his horse near the village square, where a modest crowd had gathered. The sounds of children's laughter and shouts rang through the cool air. Across the far other side of the square was the back of a school. He dismounted, tying his horse near a small shop before making his way towards the commotion. It was a group of children playing in a clearing, a crude playground of wooden beams and dangling ropes. Behind it he could see what must have been a school. Yet it was not the game that had drawn the crowd's attention. It was a conflict that was unfolding. A stocky boy, larger than the others, had a cruel smirk on his face. His stance was wide, confident, the stance of a child who had never known real opposition. His cronies flanked him, watching as he shoved a smaller boy backwards. The boy whimpered, "Honest, Ray, I didn't see you there." The boy was visibly shaking. "You know what happens to liars." The larger boy knelt next to the small boy, now involuntarily shooting backwards. "Stay where you're at, you slithering snake." "Yeah, you are a snake, and I say you'll clean my boots." A crooked smile spread across his acne-filled face, and he stood up and thrust his right boot onto the boy's lap, pinning him down. "Clean it," he growled. The boy frantically began using his worn coat sleeve to buff the muddy boot. "No!" screamed Ray. Then in a soft voice he said, "Lick it." The boy's small face turned from confusion to realization, and then to horror. He looked down at the boot and began to bend over, tears now streaming down his face. Orin had been watching this play out, but his real interest was in another boy who had also been watching from the shadows behind the local school building. Something moved about that boy. Now he emerged from the shade and made his way directly toward Ray. "That's enough, Ray," said the newcomer. Thin, muscled, but not in a large way, just tough and wiry. And the way he walked, how he spoke, exuded a quiet confidence. His world started the bully and his followers. Ray jerked back, shoving the small boy aside. "I should have known a sulker like you would come up from behind." Ray didn't hesitate, but threw a wild right hook at the younger man. He moved lightning fast to the side, and the bully stumbled forward. Orin did a double take at how quickly the boy had anticipated the punch. Ray turned and again assaulted the newcomer. His feet stayed planted, his breath measured, and his body moving just enough to move out of the way of the next punch. Ray pulled back and sneered. "You think you're something special, do you?" The younger boy's voice was quiet but firm. "I think you should stop." The other children murmured. This was not the first time such an exchange had taken place, but something in the air felt different now. Orin folded his arms, his trained eye watching closely. The bully lunged again, swinging a wicked fast punch. But again, the younger boy moved, not in the way a trained fighter would. He did not counter or block, he simply evaded. A slight shift of his weight, a well-timed step, and the strike sailed past him again, making the larger boy stumble forward this time into a puddle of mud. The children watched and gasped. Orin narrowed his eyes. There it is. Not a fighter, but something else. Awareness, instinct, connection. Ray pulled himself out of the mud and snarled at his friends. "Grab him!" 3 of his lackeys came from multiple sides, and before he could maneuver out of the way, they grabbed his arms. The first punch struck the boy's ribs, knocking the wind from him. The next caught his jaw. He struggled, but there were too many. Orin sighed. "That's enough." His voice was not loud, but it cut through the crowd like a blade. The bullies froze as the tall, hooded man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The larger boy swallowed, suddenly unsure. Who are you?" Orin didn't answer. He merely looked at him. And then the bullies scattered. With blood on his lip, the boy wiped his mouth, then looked up at Orin with cautious eyes. He did not look afraid. If anything, he looked curious. Orin extended a hand. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up. My name's Orin Calder." The boy reached out and felt the firm grasp. "I'm Ter'Ryn Halt." They walked in silence through the village streets. Orin did not ask if Ter'Ryn was all right. The boy would not want pity. He knew that. Instead, he studied him. There was no formal training in him, no discipline of a fighter, yet he had moved like one who was actually connected to the Nexus. "You stopped them. Why?" "I didn't really stop them. Folks like that make their own decisions." The boy scoffed. "It didn't look like it." Orin stopped walking and turned to him. "They wouldn't have fought you if they didn't feel threatened. You made them afraid." Ter'Ryn looked away. "Well, I wasn't trying to." "I know," said Orin. "That's what makes this interesting." The boy didn't understand yet, and that was fine. Understanding would come in time. They reached the edge of the square near an inn. The crowds had begun to thin. Orin stopped, glancing once more at Ter'Ryn, as if confirming something. He gave a small nod to himself and whispered, "I've found one." Ter'Ryn blinked. "What was that?" Orin smiled and put his hand on his shoulder. "I'd like to visit you tomorrow, if you and your family would have me for the evening." His eyes were steady and light. "Well, it's just me and my pap. I don't know what he'll say." Orin nodded. "Yes, that'll do. Good night, young master." He turned and began walking towards the inn, leaving the boy standing there. Ter'Ryn was a mix of confusion, curiosity, and pain from the thumping he'd taken. That night, as the village quieted and the sea wind howled, Ter'Ryn sat by the fire in his small cottage, his father now asleep. He couldn't get the stranger out of his head. He stared at his hands. Hadn't he always felt this? Something more, something tangible he couldn't actually touch? Outside the small hut, Orin Calder sat, watching, weighing, gathering as much information as he could. Oath binding was no small thing. Choosing to train someone in the ways of the Nexus would bring massive consequences. He had seen stewards learn and become powerful only to forsake the light. And if that happened, no, he wouldn't let those thoughts take over. He knew what he'd have to do and the costs associated. For now, he would let it play out. But in his heart, he knew the boy would come. Thank you for joining me today as we look beyond the well. What lies ahead is not just a tale, it's a journey, one that we will take together. If you're ready to step further into Aldarion, subscribe and follow Beyond the Well wherever you listen to podcasts. For even more information, visit beyondthewell.net for transcripts, notes, character descriptions, maps, and much more. And remember, sometimes the path we walk reveals more than we ever imagined. So, keep seeking, keep dreaming, and keep telling your story. Bye.